Hi, thanks for joining us for another evening of poetry on a Gray Barn Rising. I'm reading the poems this evening of the monumental Greek poet Odysseas Elytis. Elytis lived from 1911 to 1996. He was a Nobel laureate in 1979, and so his work was recognized, but I really wish it had been recognized even more deeply and that more people would read his work more regularly. So I wanted to share some of his poems with you this evening. I'm going to be reading from an older book of Elytis's, The Selected Poems, which is translated by Edmund Keeley and Philip Sherrard. And I'd like to begin with one of my very favorite Elytis poems, a very strange poem. Elytis was deeply influenced by Surrealism, spent some time in France in his early years of poetic apprenticeship, spent most of his time in Greece, of course, but he did spend some time in France and associated with the Surrealist poets and painters of the time. And this is a poem that draws upon that strangeness, and I really adore it. It's called The Autopsy. And so they found that the gold of the olive root had dripped in the recesses of his heart. And from the many times that he had lain awake by candlelight, waiting for the dawn, a strange heat had seized his entrails. A little below the skin, the blue line of the horizon sharply painted, and ample traces of blue throughout his blood. The cries of birds, which he had come to memorize in hours of great loneliness, apparently spilled out all at once so that it was impossible for the knife to enter deeply. Probably the intention sufficed for the evil, which he met, it is obvious, in the terrifying posture of the innocent. His eyes open, proud, the whole forest moving still on the unblemished retina. Nothing in the brain but a dead echo of the sky. Only in the hollow of his left ear some light, fine sand, as though in a shell, which means that often he had walked by the sea alone with the pain of love and the roar of the wind. As for those particles of fire on his groin, they show that he moved time hours ahead whenever he embraced a woman. We shall have early fruit this year. Such an intense poem, the way it moves into the body of the person upon which the autopsy is being performed, but also the body of nature, the body of one's cosmic connection to the universe, the body of seasonality, really incredible grasp. One of the things Elytis is known for is that his poems are full of light. They have darkness and melancholy in them. A very famous poem of his is called The Aegean Melancholy, for example. But his poems always move toward a replenishment of that darkness, or I should say replenishment of the light from within that darkness, so that the darkness is always moving towards something generative in his work. Very, very powerful. Here's a poem that moves in that way too, called Silver Gift Poem. I know all this is nothing, and that the language I speak has no alphabet, since even the sun and the waves are a syllabic script which can be deciphered only in times of exile and sorrow, and our country a fresco covered by successive overlays, Frankish or Slav, and should you try to restore it, you are at once imprisoned and must render account to a rabble of foreign powers. victories through the instrumentality of your own, as is the custom with disasters. And yet, let us imagine children playing on an old threshing floor, which could even be in a tenement, and that the loser must, by the rules, speak and forfeit some truth to the others, so that at last they all find themselves holding in their hand a small silver gift poem. Obviously that poem ends on silver and the brilliance of that. One of Elytis' great books is called Sun the First, and again you see so much light. His poems often describe the light in the Aegean waters of his native Greece and the play of that light. And like I said, it includes darkness, but it's the play of the light that really begins to dominate in Elytis' work. Finally, I want to share a poem with you this evening called 7 Days for Eternity. And it's in 7 sections, as you might guess, beginning with Sunday, and it goes throughout the entire week. And each day is described as a day for eternity. Sunday, morning in the temple of the calf-bearer, I declare, may lovely Myrto become as true as a tree, and may her lamb, gazing for one moment straight into the eyes of my assassin, punish the most bitter of futures. Monday, presence of grass and water at my feet, which means that I exist. Before or after the glance that will turn me to stone, I raise my right hand, holding high a huge blue ear of wheat to establish a new zodiac. Tuesday, exodus of the numbers, battle between 1 and 9 on a deserted shore full of black pebbles, heaps of seaweed with gigantic vertebrae of beasts on the rocks. My 2 beloved old horses neighing as they stand above the steam rising from the sea's sulfur. Wednesday, on the other side of the thunderbolt, the burnt hand that will flower again to smooth out the folds of the world. Thursday, open door, stone steps, geranium heads, and beyond transparent roofs, paper kites, flakes of shell in the sun. A goat slowly ruminates the ages, and the smoke peaceful rises between his horns. The moment when, in the back courtyard, the gardener's daughter is kissed secretly, and from her extreme delight, a flower pot falls and breaks open. Oh, if I could only preserve that sound. Friday, feast of the Transfiguration, of the women I have loved without hope. Echo, Marina, Eleni. With each stroke of the bell, lilac falls into my arms. Then strange light, and 2 quite dissimilar pigeons carry me high into a large house covered with ivory. Saturday, cypress tree of my kin, cut by taciturn, cruel men for betrothal or death. They dig the earth round about and sprinkle it with carnation water, even though I've already uttered the words that demagnetize the infinite. I love the scope and the range and the breadth of that poem. of eternity, moving Sunday through Saturday as that poem does. That's a small sampling of the work of Odysseas Elytis. I read from this older selection of his poems chosen by and translated by Edmund Keeley and Philip Sherrard. Thanks so much for joining me in this reading. Of course, joining Bootsy. She's blissed out and very sleepy tonight, but I hope you can see her sweet little hound face, even though she may have it buried. Hopefully you'll get a good glimpse of it. Thanks so much for joining us for A Gray Barn Rising.